I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. We have a special guest with us here in the studio today. This is the New West Guitar Group. Glad to have you guys here.
How you doing?
Will Brahm, John Storie, and Perry Smith. Guys, obviously all three amazing guitar players, as you heard during the intro to the video. And we got some fun things to talk about, I think, today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, you played at the in our little lunch hour concert series here today.
Yes, the Crescendo stage.
Yeah.
It's such a cool area here at the Sweetwater facilities. This is our first time being here, so we're blown away.
Well, you guys sounded great. It was really fun hearing. And you played in town as well last Friday.
Yeah, we played in Fort Wayne last Friday, and we're on a Midwest tour right now.
How long does the tour run for?
It was 5 days, and we're all headed home. Will and I live in Los Angeles, and Perry lives in New York, so heading home tomorrow. What a great way to wrap the tour than be here at Sweetwater with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So how does that work, having one of you living on the East Coast and two of you on the West Coast?
Yeah.
So what we do is we each individually prepare our own music, and then we come together and rehearse it on the road. So we make practice tracks to practice along with, memorize all of our hard parts, and then come together and practice in the hotel room.
Right.
Right.
An hour before the show.
Yeah.
Right. Sitting down and running through
Sound check.
stuff. But you've been together for how many years now?
Over a decade.
Over a decade.
Yeah,
so
John
yes.
and I founded the group in Los Angeles. I used to live in LA before I moved to New York. And yeah, it's just been a really fun group to explore different kinds of sounds with all different kinds of guitars and pedals, and it's a challenging situation because we don't have a rhythm section, we don't have bass and drums, and so we try to really create that same sense of rhythm with the guitar.
Right, right. So it's interesting listening to you guys play, the diversity of the music that you do. Looking back, the Ramiros were a guitar quartet, obviously very classical, and they were one of the first groups I remember being a multiple guitar ensemble like that. And the LA Guitar Quartet, the California Guitar Trio, and a lot of different groups. But you guys are taking a very different direction because you're incorporating a lot more jazz than those other groups did. Tell us a little bit about how the group came together and what led you down that path.
Right, well, we were all, as Perry mentioned, we were students in California at music school and were jazz musicians, so naturally we would play standards together, and we had a big love for Wes Montgomery, Grant Green, George Benson, all of the guys in that era. So naturally we came together and started playing those tunes, and over time we started wondering if we could include the acoustic guitar, the baritone guitar, the classical guitar, and over 10 years, as Perry mentioned, we've released almost 7 records now, which feature the array of the instruments and a lot of original writing, but at the core of the original writing is the fact that we're jazz musicians. So we do include in our shows a lot of straight ahead jazz, but then we also throw in there stuff that's more Americana, folksy and rootsy.
Right. So there are two kind of different things there. In the classical world, there are pieces out there for a guitar quartet, for example.
Right.
In the jazz world, not so much, right? So tell us a little bit about how you do the arrangements when you're working on a standard or a. You guys also do some cover songs of a variety of different genres.
Right, right.
Well, since we're all three guitar players, we can easily arrange for one another. So if I were to take a song and arrange all 3 guitar parts, record each part, send them their PDF of their score and the recording, it's actually a pretty awesome way to be able to arrange the music because I know exactly what they're going to be playing.
Right. So typically one of you does an arrangement per song, you don't collaborate?
We have collaborated in the past on certain arrangements, but these days it's more of sort of one person's effort to kind of bring something new to the table. And it has been a challenge though, because as you mentioned, in the classical guitar realm, there's sort of this pre-existing repertoire of guitar quartet and guitar ensemble, but in the sort of jazz guitar realm, there's not a lot of that. There's a thing called wire choir, which was started by Tony
Rizzi.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that is sort of a bit of a foundation. And there are a couple other groups that have created their own repertoire for a guitar ensemble, but nothing like classical guitar for jazz guitar.
Right.
So we've written over 100 arrangements now, everything from straight ahead jazz tunes to arrangements of cover tunes to original tunes that incorporate different kinds of guitars and different techniques. And we've found when we go around and we do workshops all throughout the country that people are really interested in getting scores and getting copies of this stuff because there's not a lot of it out there.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you, as you sit down to work on an arrangement for one another, do you say, in this particular case, Perry should play acoustic and John should play lead and I should play melody, or do you have a particular part in mind for each person?
Well, actually, a lot of the arrangements that we do, sometimes the person who's arranging it is really playing the rhythm guitar part because the groove is such a big part of what we're doing, and that's every tune has to have a kind of its own signature pulse and groove, and we each kind of have our own concept of how we might bring that in for the tune. On top of that, we'll look at our set and I'll say, gosh, it'd be nice to have Perry on steel string, and I've been recently, I think all of us are, when we're writing new tunes for the group, thinking about how that could work into the rest of our set. Because we're managing 6 guitars on stage, and it's a lot to manage in our live shows, so we want to make that as smooth as possible. So the factors, besides just musically arranging one part for somebody, also has to do with the kind of instrument they're going to play and where in the set that song might fit in.
So you're not changing guitars, somebody can stay on a particular instrument through the course of a
And
couple
the
of songs?
tuning,
anyway?
too. Yeah, we change tunings a lot.
Right, well, talk a little bit about that. What kind of tunings or where do the tunings come from that you use for your arrangements?
Yeah, gosh, well, we of course start with standard tuning, and then in the beginning we did a lot of drop D tuning. So for you guitarists, that's when the E string is tuned down a step to D. And then actually I got heavily involved in DADGAD kind of later in college and experimented with that. It's really tricky to manage in a live show. We'd almost bring us another guitar in DADGAD. That led also us to think about capoing and getting the timbre of a capoed guitar combined with the open strings of a standard guitar. We now have a tuning that's an open F Nashville tuning, like an F chord. And we've also experimented a lot with other instruments like the baritone guitar, which some of you may know is tuned down a fifth. So we've got B, E, A, D, F sharp, B is the top string.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So those are all of our tunings, at least right now, that we use. Yeah.
Do you feel that as individuals, you each have strengths that you bring to the group? Is one of you predominantly doing this, another doing this, doing this? Where do you follow that as far as that goes?
I think part of the challenge of being in this trio is trying to, if we feel that we're lacking in one area, work on that extra hard so that we can all ideally just switch parts. Perry does a lot of rhythm, so maybe I want to take some rhythm parts to get better at that. Or Perry does a lot of leads, so John takes some more lead parts. So I think we strive for just being as equal as we can.
Right.
I mean, there are different strengths and different areas that individually we're excelling in. And with the luxury of being able to know who you're writing for oftentimes helps with the arrangements. But we certainly pass it around and feature the individual voices pretty equally throughout each show.
Yeah.
Right.
And as the great Duke Ellington said, he didn't compose first, second, third trumpet. He composed for each trumpet player because he got to know his big band members so well. And that's sort of a tradition we follow in this group. I don't even think of it anymore as guitar 1, 2, or 3. I think of it as Will's part and Perry's part because there's sounds that each of these guys get that I wouldn't be able to get no matter how hard I practiced, of course.
Right.
Yeah, that's fun being on the road with other guitar players. You learn about guitar stuff so much, it's so much fun. Yeah.
Right. I was very interested to hear some of the covers you were doing. You did Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears and Wichita Lineman,
Right.
and Peter Gabriel, right, in your eyes. When you approach those songs, obviously those are pretty densely orchestrated as far as the original recordings of things go. How do you choose the parts that you're going to put together and bring out and to make a cohesive sound so it is as recognizable as it was when you guys were playing it?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. I could sort of start by answering the easiest part to put down is the melody, because generally that's going to be something that you can do on a single note or double stops that you can really just, those songs you mentioned have beautiful melodies, so you can really sing those out on the guitar. And then the other part you really try to think of is the rhythm guitar part, which when we look at a cover like Rule the World or In Your Eyes, or we also do some stuff by the Police, like Wrapped Around Your Finger, King of Pain, or anything, you're kind of trying to channel what the drums and the bass are doing and try to understand how you can pull that rhythm on the guitar. So the drummer for the Police, Stuart Copeland, is one of our favorite drummers to listen to of all time. And we've been in long car rides on tours listening to the Police and like really thinking, okay, how can we make this acoustic guitar track really feel like the Stuart Copeland part?
Right.
And so that's kind of the inspiration when we're picking some of these covers is we're specifically choosing them because of the beats that we can get on the acoustic guitar, on the baritone guitar, on the jazz guitar, or anything. So.
Right. What about when you shift over to composing original music for the group? How do you approach that?
Well, I think it's different for each of us, and I have a different process for every tune. Sometimes it's a melody that comes to me first, and sometimes I'll sit down with an instrument and there'll be a certain line or a certain chordal part that I'll want to develop. And oftentimes we're composing for other ensembles too. Will has his own group called Homenaje, and Perry leads another trio and a quartet in New York. So we're all writing music for other ensembles. I've been writing some new solo music as well, and sometimes it'll fall in the New West bin, and then I'll just pull up Logic and pull out some microphones and start coming up with some ideas. And sometimes it happens overnight, and sometimes originals will sit in the box for a few months. Right. And I'll ask their guys' opinions. I'll be like, do you think we need this kind of tune? And because again, you're worth guitar players. So it's a different process. I would say mainly for me, as Perry mentioned, a melody will come to my mind. I'll write that down and then work on some harmonic options around that melody that could kind of influence a vibe for the tune.
Right.
I would say that the common thread is one of like kind of editing and working on the song until you have something that you can really bring to the table. Whether you're recording it and listening back to it or writing it all down in Finale or Sibelius and kind of hearing the playback and following it that way. Both those are incredible tools to kind of help draft new versions of a song that you're working on.
Sure, right. It's interesting watching a guitar ensemble, whether all acoustic or electric or a mix, as you guys often are. Other instruments are used to playing in sections. You'll have a horn section, a string section, whatever it might be. Guitarists typically don't play in a section like that, whether in the classical world or not.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about how you manage that dynamic and don't get into volume wars and don't suffer from some of those things that can be a real problem.
That's a big thing, and you said the word volume. We all use volume pedals to help blend. So if I have the melody in one part, I might come out a little bit. And if I have a rhythm guitar part, I might back the volume off so that I can really dig in. So knowing who has which part and blending, and that changes from venue to venue and from room to room. So that's a big thing, being able to work together as guitar players.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you're correct in that sense, though. It's not taught for guitar players when they're young, the way it is the saxophone section.
Right.
From the moment they're in middle school or high school, if they're playing in jazz big band, they're taught to follow the lead alto player on all their phrasing, on all their solos. Guitar players, we don't get any of that.
Right.
And so on a lot of the songs that we have that fall more into the straight-ahead jazz realm, we write a lot of solos, like things that you might hear a saxophone section play in the Count Basie Orchestra or something. And we're thinking about the phrasing. We're thinking about how we're following the lead voice. And I don't see it happening with a lot of guitar students, a lot of guitar institutions, enough of this idea of doing that, and it's really beneficial.
Yeah, and also
Really
it's a trust issue too when we're in the live situation. We'll be sound checking. I'm kind of standing in front of my amp, and people are like, "Hey, you're just a little loud," and I'm like, "Oh, really? It feels right where I am," because each room is so different too. So the volume wars, it can happen if we're not really in tune, and just standing a few feet apart with our amplifiers behind us and the monitors in front of us can really change how we hear the ensemble and change how we hear our blend. So for that reason, guitar players haven't had a lot of these ensemble kinds of experiences. It's really hard to play a guitar in an ensemble format and have it blend like a chamber group or a sax solo would.
Right.
And one of the things I learned, especially about electric guitar, I learned kind of later on, is the amp that you use. It's so directional with the sound. So if you're just a couple feet away, it's going to sound different to you than if you're, a couple feet the other way. So you'll see we'll like angle our amps just so, we'll prop them up so they're really coming right to our ears. And the other night, I was thinking, I feel like it's a little loud on stage, and then we prop our amps up a little bit more so we can hear ourselves better, and it makes more of a difference.
Right.
So many little details that.
Yeah, right.
Drive you
Another
crazy.
one of those is with guitar players more so than with most other instruments is the tonal aspect of it as well, because you guys each of you has a pedal board,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of different variety of tones you have there, yet you have to sound like an ensemble. Talk a little bit about that aspect of it.
Yeah.
So some of the pedals, we all have some similar pedals, such as might use some reverb or some delay, occasionally some overdrive. John uses tremolo sometimes for a very specific part. It's not like he'll just kick it on during someone's solo just for the fun of it. So,
Or maybe I will.
and we're playing very like closely related guitars like hollow bodies. So the pedals help, but we don't do anything too crazy. Sometimes an octave pedal.
Right.
Well, and as you mentioned earlier, Will, the volume pedal is really key because it allows us to really use our ears to blend, much like how a horn player would use wind to create dynamics on their instrument. And the volume pedal can give you more sustain as well. There's a lot of rhythm guitar parts in the group where we want zero sustain and only the sound off the top of the instrument, even when you're playing an electric guitar. So the volume pedal was the first thing for us when we started experimenting with pedals back in the day. And of course that led us to we should have tuners on the pedal board rather than a headstock tuner, although we like our headstock tuners too, just as another way to tune.
Sure.
And as Will mentioned, it's sort of over the years we've expanded the palette, but the palette is expanded to sort of outline the clean sound of the group because the best way to get the instruments to blend is just to get their natural sound. We want people to come to the show and hear what the instruments really sound like, whether they're all the way at the back of the hall or up at the front row. So the pedals are just a way for us to outline that.
Right.
And still, so much of the sound is just coming from your fingers, not from the board, not from the amp. Like
Right.
where you choose, with your right hand especially, where you choose to pick, how hard you're picking. Oftentimes depending on the part, I'll be more tasto or more ponticello, or more toward the fingerboard or more toward the bridge, just to try to bring the sound out the way is necessary to cut through.
Right.
The pedals, the amps are important, but the hands, that's really the foundation.
Sure.
Yeah.
And actually, you guys do a very interesting thing. You mic your hollow body guitars in addition to running them through amplifiers.
Sure do.
What is the idea behind that?
Well, the condenser mic, small diaphragm condensers of any kind on top of the guitar, right where the neck joins the body, for those of you who are experimenting with recording, is a great way to capture an acoustic guitar sound. I learned that from watching some of the Sweetwater Minute videos a long time ago.
Nice.
But, live, we'll use them and we'll just set them up on stage to capture the overall sound because they're cardioid mics, so they're just getting kind of these areas. And even when we're playing electric guitar, the sound of the pick on the strings, as Perry mentioned earlier, can sometimes create the effect that brushes have on a snare drum. And we don't want to lose that. People who might be sitting close to us can hear that, but people in the middle of the room, in the back of the room, it might get lost. So we're noticing that when we use the pencil mics, it really tightens up the sound of the group. And when we record, that's what we do also. We mic up the amplifiers with a ribbon and a 57 usually, and put a pencil mic on the guitar, and it's just kind of doesn't get much better than that, we feel.
It's also the kind of instruments we're playing. I mean, if we were playing Strats and Les Pauls, there may not be a lot of acoustic sound coming off the front of the
Right.
guitar.
Right.
But for an L5, 175s, acoustic guitars, nylon string guitars, there's so much sound coming off the front
Right.
that if you don't capture that, sometimes in bigger halls, the sound is muddy, and they're just hearing the amp, and all of a sudden we started bringing these pencil mics in. There was the clarity. It was like people in a 400-seat theater were right up in front. They could hear the front of the guitar.
Right.
Yeah, we
Really
love
get
doing that.
articulation.
Yeah.
You mentioned the acoustic guitar, and actually we want to make sure that we thank Radial, because you're here on their behalf, and you use several of their pedals. Tell us about the connection there to Radial and what you do with their pedals.
Sure. Well, for a long time, we were struggling getting a good acoustic guitar sound live. It's really a difficult thing to do. And the first thing we were looking for were just little, DI boxes or preamps that we could essentially use to get a solid tone through a monitor through the house. And when we found the Radial Tonebone PZ Deluxe, it was kind of like, game over. This is the pedal. It's been so consistent. It's so durable. The EQs are incredible. They're really sensitive. They give you a ton of different options. There's ground lifts. There's high pass filters. I mean, the mid shift things with the frequencies are huge. And so we've really learned how to dial it in, and combined with really whatever kind of acoustic guitar you might be using, I really believe you can get a solid DI sound with the PZ Deluxe. The other unit we use is the AB switch, and for a lot of years we had like a separate board for acoustic guitar stuff, and we'd have like it'd just be too much to manage, So now when we switch between electric guitar on the show and I switch over to the acoustic guitar, I just hit my B channel and I can go right into the radio and bypass my amp,
Right.
and bypass some of the pedals that I don't want to be running through.
Right.
And John uses another radio to let him tell you about, and sometimes he actually uses both channels to get a really cool effect.
Because I use the baritone in the group, and we'll use like QSC K10 behind us. It's a really great effect to combine the Radial PZ Deluxe through the QSC with a baritone guitar, an instrument with pickups on it. And then combine that with my amplifier sound. So the Radial gear is really versatile. They market it for people using piezo-style pickups on an acoustic guitar, but it actually works great for electrics. It saved me on a few gigs where the amp wasn't even working. We tour with other people, and I'm on the road with a singer. I was once in a venue and the amp didn't work. I did the entire gig with my L5 through the Tonebone, and it sounded great. People at the end of the show were like, "What were you using for an amp? It sounded so good." So it really fattens up the tone, the features on that unit are awesome. Even using having a mute switch when we're at sound check.
The boost.
Yep, but the AB switchers that Radial is known for, a lot of their switching equipment, they have a whole array of switchers for guys who have like massive pedal boards. And we have a pretty simple rig in this group. And for guitarists out there who might be on a gig or playing in church and they're playing both acoustic guitar and electric guitar, it's really handy to have an AB switch so that you can have one pedal board, one cable, and the sound guy isn't freaking out when you switch guitars because you're going to go kaboom through the PA system.
Right.
So we are really happy to be here today with Radial Engineering, and we really want to thank them for creating such like rock solid gear. I mean, it's really, really great to have on the road. Peace of mind for sure.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's very, very cool.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the, I guess you would say, making it as a musician in today's world. I know you guys all have other things that you do besides this, and you teach, and you're doing a lot of different things. Talk a little bit about that.
So one thing that all three of us did after high school, we went to college to study music. We all majored in jazz guitar. So getting into a organized network like that is a good way to start, as opposed to just moving to Sunset Boulevard and trying to book a bunch of shows at the Whiskey A Go-Go.
Right.
So getting in the right networks of people, of professional musicians, and you'd be amazed how small the world really is, where you're studying with your teachers, and then a couple years later you're playing gigs with them, and then they're referring you for other things. Being guitar players, we all, like John said, we all have our own projects, this one included, and we all work as sidemen too, being able to survive as a sideman for various genres you might get called for. And just being easy to work with always helps too.
I think that's a big thing, right?
Right, and Perry and I met in Los Angeles. Los Angeles, like Nashville and New York, are epicenters for the music industry. The music industry is changing a lot, and Los Angeles has been a great place personally for me to have my career. I work in the jazz scene, but I also do quite a bit of session work for a variety of producers and film and TV composers. A lot of times those guys have your number and they'll just call you and say, "Can you be at the studio in 5 minutes? I need to do all these tracks." So it really helps to be in a city like that for those who are interested in pursuing that kind of career. And it's amazing what the internet has done for this career as well, for sure.
All right.
I guess my advice to kind of aspiring young guitar players is to try to be really versatile when you start out, so you can be called to play, jazz standards at a restaurant for 4 hours, or you can be called to do a wedding gig and play top 40 tunes of every decade. Kind of be able to do that, because it's not that difficult to kind of have a versatile foundation. But as you build your career, you want to make sure that you hone in and specialize in kind of one area that you can really be competitive in. That's sort of my advice, and really whatever city you live in, that will serve you well. And then always be prepared. Always be really prepared for every little gig. I remember when I was starting out, I'd get called for like a brunch gig, you know, and I'd be like really practicing for it and making sure I was going to nail it, because I always felt that one gig would lead to the next, would lead to the next, would lead to the next.
Right.
And so people who usually show up prepared for gigs are the ones that get called again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
When you guys entered the music programs that you studied in, were you already pretty accomplished? Did you read already? Were you studying jazz deeply? Where were you at with all that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the level now in music schools is really high, and many of my students who are teenagers are reading multiple lines on a sheet music, reading classical guitar, reading a wide array of styles. And we had all practiced individually a lot and really honed in our skills as improvisers prior to entering school. And what's really funny is we talk all the time about how we had no idea back then what today was going to be like, you know, and how the music industry has changed so much. And as Perry mentioned, just how you're called upon to do so many different things now. So for those who are interested in getting in music, you just have to prepare yourself to teach and prepare yourself to perform a wide array of styles. And we had all practiced quite a bit and played with a variety of different gigs prior to us entering school. And over the years, we all kind of get called for specific things. And I've been working in LA 10 years now, and people really know me as a jazz musician, which is great because I get called for the gigs I want to do. Sometimes it's a little hard to branch off into other styles of music that I might want to start working with. So I have to be a little more proactive in other styles of music.
Right.
But yes, we all were trained classically and then through jazz, and then have also, as Perry said, worked in a variety of styles through college and into the professional world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You guys have worked with, or at least been exposed to, some pretty amazing teachers. I saw Joe DiOrio and John Schofield, and we talked a little bit about some of the guys from the LA Guitar Quartet, Scott Tennant and Bill Cannengeiser.
Yeah.
You know, tell us a little bit about your perception of artists that are on that level and studying with them.
Wow, I mean, I guess I'll take this one.
Yeah, go for it.
You're kind of starstruck usually, you know, like I remember the first time I met Bill Cannengeiser and Joe DiOrio, Scott Tennant, because they were all teachers at USC where we were studying. You know, the first time you're just kind of like, oh my God. But, you know, as you get to know them, they're just regular people like anyone else. They started out just like you are at that point. And, you know, the great thing about the people that we've been studying with and we've been fortunate to be around is they've been good role models to us, you know, musically, and they've wanted to impart their knowledge to us. And I think, you know, when you get to that point in your career where you have a lot of students and you're mentoring people, that becomes really important. You know, you want to pass on what you understand, and you want to see those students grow past you, you know, in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, they're all wonderful folks and great teachers and huge inspirations.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, across the board too, when you work with artists who are really well known, I just find these days that everyone's so encouraging of young people like us who are out there doing our thing, and that's great. It's a community, you know, the music community is full of really wonderful people. A lot of people who are self-proclaimed that they don't teach, yet they are teaching just by us being on the bandstand with them. Mm-hmm. And I feel very fortunate, I know these guys do too, just the cities we live in provide those kinds of opportunities, allow us to play with some pretty heavy musicians and guys who've been on the road for 30 years, you know, and we've been on the road for 10 years, so it slowly works its way up. And yeah, studying with Joe DiOrio, for those of you who don't know, I mean, he's just a really great jazz guitar teacher. Check out his stuff for sure.
Right, definitely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned being on the road. I'm curious, you each travel with a couple of guitars, you each travel with an amp, you travel with a pedal board. How do you manage all that?
So we don't always travel with amps. Sometimes we'll get amps that we really like shipped out to a certain location in the country where we'll be. But we definitely travel with our pedal board, which we have kind of smaller sizes so that we can carry them on. Obviously a suitcase for clothes and a toothbrush. 2 guitars each, and and that does it.
Right.
So sometimes we'll have to use whatever amp is at the venue, anywhere from really great amps to not great amps at all. So
Kind of at the mercy of whatever's
whatever's there. Checking guitars can always be a little scary. We try to have good flight cases when we check one under the plane. Sometimes we get fortunate enough to be able to carry one on and like put it in the closet or the overhead bins. But it's a pretty hardwired process.
It's hard. I mean, if you're a guitar player, you're the only guitar player in the band, you're just bringing one guitar, you can probably carry it on most of the time. But when you're 3 guitar players and there's 6 guitars, we can't show up to the gate with six guitars.
guitars.
They're just gonna, they're
To
gonna
look
be
at
like,
TSA, they're like,
"Get out of here."
you three, not happening.
So, you know, we check them, but we have some good Calton cases that are pretty
Right.
solid for that.
All right.
Right.
Very cool.
Yeah. Airlines, you know, it's airlines,
It's
but
just a gamble.
if you're nice, they're nice to you.
Sometimes.
The code word is when you get on the plane and they're like, "Oh, are you going to play us a song?" I'm like, "You're going to be nice to me." Okay, all right. Yes. Let's see if we can get it in that overhead, you know? And Pedal Train, you know, we're grateful to them. I mean, they make these really slick boards that are like the size of a trumpet case. So I'm able to put it under the seat on really crowded flights. We really like the Pedal Train boards for that very reason, for sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Guys, it's such a pleasure to have you here. We enjoyed listening to you
Thanks.
play.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you giving us a little taste of what you do here in this video and sharing your experience and all that you've learned over the years of doing this. Incredible to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mitch.
you.
Thank you,
And we're
Sweetwater.
also very grateful to Radial as well for,
Yes.
for,
Yeah.
sponsoring you guys coming in. So very cool, very cool. Appreciate it. Please come back.
We will.
We will. Trust us.
Thank you, Mitch.
And thank you for joining me for Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. Be sure to tune in next time. We'll have more guitars, more amps, more effects, and we'll be making lots of music. I'm Mitch Gallagher.